Hi folks, this is Karim Rao from IT Visualizer channel. We will continue our lab, the Red Alert Labs, the video number 116. We have been discussing in the previous video the following. We have been working now for 27 videos on discussing the documentation, which is called CIS Critical Security Controls version 8, which is a documentation that says how you can protect yourself against cybersecurity attacks. This documentation was provided and published by Center for Internet Security, which is a non-profitable organization seeking to publish and issue documentations concerning security, especially securing different operating systems and different applications and different network structures. So in this documentation, it says or stated that to protect yourself against cybersecurity attacks, you need to work with 18 safeguard controls or 18 controls. We have discussed until now 17 points. Today we will discuss the last point, which is point number 18, which is called penetration test. So let's have a look or a little bit of a description about what is a penetration test. So this is the last point. Let me show you all. This is the documentation. Let's go further and see what this point says. Okay, penetration testing. And let's go further here. He is saying that test the effectiveness and resiliency of enterprise assets through identifying and exploiting weakness in controls, people, processes, and technology, and simulating the objectives and actions of an attacker. So penetration testing, it is an advanced point after vulnerability testing or vulnerability discovery. So there is often some confusion between what is vulnerability and what is penetration testing. Vulnerability or discovering of vulnerability. Discovering of vulnerability, some software only discover the vulnerability and stops at that point and leave you to fix this vulnerability by for example, disabling some services or closing some ports. But penetration testing, it gets the vulnerability and then begins working with it. So for example, if there is a vulnerability, through it a hacker can take control of a machine, then the penetration test will simulate this action. It will take advantage of the vulnerability and then begins controlling your network, or to simulate what will happen if this vulnerability is used. So penetration testing, it's an advanced point after discovering the vulnerability. Okay, so this is what penetration testing means, and he's saying here that you should make a penetration testing to all, or to make this test to all of your different components within your network. So it's not only PCs, there are people, there are social engineering penetration testing, there is authentication penetration testing, there is a lot of things actually. And here CIS recommends that such testing to be done by professional companies, not to be done internally, or it should be done internally, but with someone that have expertise in doing this kind of testing, because this can interrupt the production or can interrupt the workflow. So this should be carefully done, and sometimes some penetration testing will even corrupt some data or corrupt some operating systems. So this should be done carefully, and when this penetration testing should be done, there should be something like a schedule, okay, because it will interrupt the flow of work or interrupt your production network. Okay, so this should be done very, very carefully. Okay, penetration testing, there is a lot of things actually, there's a lot of methods, and I have here a PDF that shows how, or shows some methods for penetration testing that can be done. But again, I urge you all not to do this penetration testing unless you are that you know what you are doing exactly. Okay, so here for example, he's saying that he's giving you some methods of penetration testing, some links. Okay, there is the PCI Standard Council PDF. Okay, this is PCI, very known, some security standards known on all of the world, PCI security standards. So he's saying here, he's giving you a PDF on penetration testing guide. Okay, and also there is an organization, OWSP, we have discussed this before. This is an organization, it's focused on how to create secure applications. So here they give you also a way to make some penetration testing. Okay, so again, penetration testing is very, very important, because this is the second step after discovering a vulnerability. Penetration test, it is the second point after discovering a vulnerability. It goes further and simulates an attack. Okay, I think let me show you over here what is a penetration. So saying here, penetration tests are expensive, complex, and potentially introduce their own risk. Experienced people from reputable vendors must conduct them. Some risks include unexpected shutdown of systems that might be unstable, exploits that might delete or corrupt data or configuration, and the output of testing report that needs to be protected itself. So the testing report itself should be encrypted, maybe because it's not in clear, to be in clear text. Okay, because it gives up step-by-step instructions on how to break into the enterprise to target critical assets or data. So this is one thing also we should take into consideration. So I think here he's saying that there is some differences between penetration testing, or differs. Here we can say that penetration testing differs from vulnerability testing. Okay, vulnerability testing just checks for presence of unknown insecure enterprise assets and stops there. Penetration testing goes further to exploit those weaknesses to see how far an attacker could get. Okay, so this is the differences between penetration testing and vulnerability testing, and this, he said, that was stated in control number 7. We have discussed this before. So these are two PDFs how you can conduct penetration testing, and again take into consideration to be specialized, or to have, or to know what you are doing exactly, because they can corrupt some systems. So these are two PDFs. Okay, and there is some steps here that this the CIS says to conduct a penetration testing, or to do a penetration testing, even, or to schedule a penetration testing, even though if you are not doing it, or a third-party vendor will do it. So let's see here what he say. Test the effectiveness and the relevancy of enterprise assets through identifying and exploiting weakness in controls, people, processes, and technology, and simulate the objectives and actions of an attacker. Establish and maintain a penetration testing program. Establish and maintain a penetration testing program, okay, to do a schedule appropriate to the size, complexity, and maturity of the enterprise, because this penetration testing its duration and its complexity will depend upon the company size. Okay, penetration testing programs characteristics include scope, such as network, which scope or which part of the network you will apply the penetration testing on. Maybe the network, maybe the web applications, maybe application programming interfaces, or hosted services, or physical premises control. So penetration testing can be done to different devices, maybe network devices, web applications. Okay, so all of these you should focus, or you should state which penetration testing you will do for which device or which application. And also limitations, acceptable hours of working, the penetration testing duration, because I said before it can corrupt or can interrupt your workflow. So this should be scheduled. Okay, and exclude attack types, point of contact, exclude attack types. Maybe you don't need to do all of the penetration testing in full. Maybe you need to only test some methods of penetration, not all of attacks type. For example, maybe you are only focusing on web sites attack, for example. You don't need to do all of penetration testing, or to apply some, or to test for some attacks only, not all of types of attacks. Point of contact information, who is the one responsible for doing this penetration testing, and how to communicate with him, and what information he needs to do the penetration testing. Maybe he needs some information. Who will provide him with this information? Redemption, how the redemption of the vulnerabilities will be done through the penetration testing program, such as how findings will be routed internally, and responsive requirements. So here he's saying that you need to have a penetration testing program that will include all of the elements, the scope of the penetration testing, the type of penetration testing, it is an application or a device, the contact information, the one responsible for contacting the information to and get the reports from, how we will redeem this or we will fix these issues resulted from a penetration testing, the time that we should apply this penetration testing, how much time we need, in what days we should do. Okay, this is point number one. And again, he's saying here that this penetration testing should be done internally, okay, if you have expertise in doing this kind of tests, and externally. So it should be done internally from your organization and externally. Here is saying point number two, perform periodic external penetration tests based on program requirements, no less than annually. So you should do this on an annual basis. The vulnerability scanning should be done frequently, or more frequently, maybe on maybe every quarter. But penetration tests should be done no less than annual, once a year maybe. External penetration testing must include enterprise and developmental environmental reconnaissance to detect exploitative information. Anyway, penetration testing requires specialized skills, okay, and experience, and must be conducted through a qualified party. The testing may be clear box or opaque box. So he's saying here that this depends upon the skills, upon the people that are doing the penetration test. So you should hire a qualified party, because with this should or not doing it in a proper way, it will break your network. Okay, remedy penetration test finding. Remedy penetration testing finding based on the enterprise policy for redemption, scope, and prioritization. So you should, if you find some vulnerabilities, then you should fix them according to your vulnerability policy or preventive management policy. For example, maybe it's if it is a high vulnerability, then you should schedule it to do it in a certain time, maybe when the employees are on a vacation. Or if it's a normal vulnerability, then this can be postponed or can be scheduled. Or if it's a low vulnerability, then we can leave it, for example, maybe if it's not that much of risk. Okay, so remedy penetration testing findings, validate security measures. Point number four, validate security measure after penetration test if deemed necessary. So after doing the penetration test and fixing the vulnerabilities, then we should validate security measures. We should revise our security measures to see if this penetration test can succeed again. We should repeat the penetration test and see if it will succeed after fixing the vulnerability. Okay, so modify rule sets and capabilities to detect the techniques used during testing. So this is why penetration testing is done, to validate our security measures and to rectify them or to edit them or to correct them. Okay, validate security measures. Okay, at the end, perform periodic internal penetration test. Perform a periodic internal penetration test based on program requirements, no less annually. The testing may be clear box or opaque box. So he's saying that penetration system should be done externally and internally. Penetration test findings should be fixed. We need to revise our security measures. We need to have a program. So this program or penetration testing program will include to do external penetration tests, internal penetration tests, should include the time, the frame to do this penetration test, the people involved, the scope of this penetration test, if it's a web or a network or application. All of this should be done, and the point of contact information, who we will contact to get this penetration test results, and who he needs to get information to make his penetration test successful. So all of this should be done. Okay, so these are the 5 points. Let's see some documentations concerning these penetration tests. So for example, there is the PCI penetration test. Let me see whether there is some, or there is a PDF I have downloaded concerning how to do a penetration test through the PCI security standards. Let's see here, what is PP penetration testing guide. So this is by the PCI. So this is PCI security standards. This is a very known, organization to issue standards to secure, especially devices used in financial transactions. Okay, so this is C. Let's for example see here. He's saying, how does penetration test differ from a vulnerability scan? He's saying that vulnerability scan identify, rank, and report vulnerabilities if exploited may result in an intentional and unintentional compromise of a system. Penetration test identify ways to exploit vulnerabilities to circumvent or defeat the security features of the component. So he is here, he is taking the vulnerabilities and simulate an attacker or simulate an attack. Okay, when to do? At least quarterly, and after significant changes, at least annually. So this is done less. Okay, typically a variety of automated tools combined with manual verification of identified issues, a manual process that may include the use of vulnerability scans and other automated tools, resulting in a comprehensive report. So this is the differences between vulnerability scan and penetration test, and this is done after vulnerability scan. Okay, so this is one documentation, and here is stating more differences between vulnerability scan and penetration test. He's saying that duration relatively short amount of time, typically several seconds to several minutes per scanned host. Here engagement may last days or weeks, so this here the time duration is shorter than this depending on the scope of the test and the size of the environment to be tested. This test may grow in time and complexity if efforts uncover additional scope. So this should be planned carefully because it will take a lot of time and a lot of days and weeks. Okay, so this should be done automated, and it takes a short amount of time. Okay, so this is some differences. These documentations say here, for example, what is the differences between this documentation state, PCI states what is the difference between vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. He is saying the scope defines the cardholder data environment as people, process, and technology that store, process, or transmit cardholder data or sensitive authentication data. So this is the PCI standards focuses or addresses cardholder data environment, or the devices that will be used to process and transmit sensitive data, maybe financial data, okay, commercial data, or sensitive authentication data. So this is why the PCI standards are very, very famous standards and are used worldwide. So we can see here, for example, he's saying that external penetration test, the scope and service exposed external parameter of the CI critical system conducted to accessible public network infrastructure. It should assess any unique access to the scope from public networks, including server. Anyway, so he's here stating what is an external penetration test, what is an internal penetration test. Let's see here the table of content. So here is saying the scope of penetration test: internal testing, segment controls, application layer, and network testing. So you see here different testing purposes. Okay, so here you can test application, test network layer, types of penetration test, qualifications of a penetration tester, who the one that you should assign this task to. He should have certain certifications. Okay, for example, he's saying that you should have certification, security certified professional, ethical hacker, okay, something like past experience. Okay, appropriate penetration testing experience and qualification cannot be met by certification alone. So the certification is not only the criteria that you will use to hire a security officer, okay, or a penetration tester. Okay, the experience should be involved, be also another criteria. Therefore, confirmation of additional criteria is necessary. For example, review of the extent actual engagement that has been performed and relevant work experience are important consideration when selecting a penetration test or a team. So we can see here that this documentation provides a good reference on how to do this penetration testing. This is a very good guide, and it will give you a lot of info. This is this is a penetration testing frame or penetration testing guidelines. Okay, so this is one thing, and there is another something here I saw from the internet: penetration testing a survival guide. So this was a PDF. I have downloaded a free PDF called Penetration Testing, a Survival Guide Learning Path. So a complete penetration testing guide facilitating smooth backtracking for working hackers. So this is a PDF that will show you how you can do some penetration testing using Kyle Linux. Okay, so these are a lot of things actually. Here we see, for example, the table of contents. Here that we will use Kyle Linux to do, for example, Windows penetration testing. We will do web penetration also using Kyle Linux. So this is some practical lessons how to do a penetration testing. Maybe the previous PDF on how to do or how to have a frame or theoretical penetration guide, penetration testing guidelines. This is the practical way of doing it. Okay, but again, I should stress on this should be done by an expert. Okay, not to do it without necessary knowledge. Okay, so here we can see that he is giving you some recommendation about the machine that you will use to use it as a hacking tool. For example, maybe you need to have a workstation of minimum 8 GB of RAM. Ubuntu or Debian based OS is recommended. So these are a good PDF. I will leave it in the description of the video along with the PCI standards for penetration testing guide. All of this should be used as a reference for you, and if you know the necessary knowledge to do penetration test, okay, go ahead, but you need to be careful again, and I stress on that you should hire some qualified people to do this, and the PCI states who is the qualified penetration tester based on his certification and his past experience. Okay, so these are this is the last point that we will discuss today concerning the CIS Critical Security Controls version 8 documentation. In the upcoming video, we'll begin working with a very critical issue also, how to secure Windows firewall. So we will use, or let me show you a little bit of something here. We will use the CIS use the Department of Defense of the United States recommendations on how to secure Windows Windows firewall. But let me first go and let you all see let me get you the recommendations. This is the library version. I think this is for the latest one. So let's go to Windows. Okay, we will discuss in the upcoming video. Let me show you all the Windows firewall. Okay, this is the one that we will discuss in the upcoming video, the Windows Firewall Advanced Security Recommendations. It contains actually about 21 points. It will show you all how you can secure your Windows firewall. Okay, again, as a best practice, to disable it on servers and to activate it on workstations. We will see how we can secure our Windows firewall on Windows 10 or Windows 11 and Windows Server, okay, based on the recommendations of the Department of Defense of the United States. Hope this video is in front of you all, and thank you all for viewing. Thank you so much.